Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 255 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melissa Lieberman, and today we're talking about a real-life growth path. I want to share with you what it looks like to take a consulting business from the 250 range to over 500, so you can have a tangible example of how this is possible for you in your business. So exciting. I had a couple of inspirations for this episode. The first is that I was talking with a consultant the other day who I had worked with last year, and they gave me their final results. And it was so exciting that I was excited to share this with you in, of course, not a redacted way, but this will give you the specific strategies that this consultant used to double their business. And the other reason why is because one of the most favorite episodes that I see in the data, but also just anecdotally that people tell me, is the episode about how to create a 50K month as a new norm in your business. So we'll put the link to that one in the show notes. But for today, stick with me here. We're going to talk about this specific real life example to help you to achieve this growth and finally hit those big goals that you've been setting for yourself. Or perhaps you're already at the 500K level and you're ready to double that to $1 million. The same principles apply. So regardless of what the exact number is for you, when you think about doubling your business, these are the 5 pieces that you want to tackle in order to make that happen. All right, let's talk about the agenda. So first, I will share with you the companion resource that goes with today's episode. It's one you haven't heard of, I don't think, ever. So I'm excited to share that one with you. It's been on my website for a while, but I haven't talked about it on the podcast, at least for a long time. Number 2, so after that, I will share with you the before of this business, what the 258K version of this business look like. You'll probably see some familiarity with what you're doing in your own business. I should say some similarities with what you're doing with your business. And then I'll share with you what the 5 shifts were that this consultant took to double his business. And then we'll dive into each one of those individually so you can really understand what they mean. And then we'll talk about the final results, which was the 514K and what that looks like. And then I'll summarize it, what the real lessons were behind this for this consultant, but more importantly, as you're listening, for you and your own business. And then I'll share with you the step to put this episode into action. So that's our agenda for today. Let's talk about the companion resource to start with. So I have created a Double Your Consulting Business workbook. You can find it on my website, melissalieberman.com, in the IC Toolkit section. That's the IC for Independent Consultant Toolkit. That's a drop-down menu or a menu on the website. And then if you scroll down to the scale section, you'll find this workbook, the blueprint to double your consulting business. You can also just go straight to melissalieberman.com/double, and we'll put that link in the show notes for you so you can see it in your podcast player and open it up. Okay, so that is what will help you to implement what we're talking about today. Now let's start with this example, this exciting example. Hopefully it's an inspiration to you, not something that makes you feel jealous or why can they do it and I can't type thought process, which believe me, I've had that when I was struggling. I was having that thought process often and it wasn't helpful. So I just want to point that out to you. This is meant to help you to see that this is possible for you. This consultant is not a unicorn. This consultant doesn't have a really unique niche or specialization. This consultant doesn't come to the table with anything more than you have. And I want to share that with you as we go through this episode. Think about what they have and how they're similar to you, not how they're different and it's not possible for you. Okay, with that warning in mind, let's talk about this starting point, this 258K business that this consultant had. He was a fractional COO and did a lot of project type work, sometimes small projects, sometimes a little bit bigger, but was juggling multiple clients. And, he had ranged between 200 and 300K for several years, sometimes on the lower end, sometimes on the higher end. When we started working together in the middle, and that's where he just kept ping ponging essentially, and really essentially experiencing a plateau. His revenue is definitely tied to his availability and to his effort, especially as a fractional COO, I should say. Oftentimes he felt like an extra pair of hands, even though, he had set some boundaries of I'm only working on this client on these days and that type of thing. But that was, in essence, his business reality. And the thought process he had at the time that kept him ping ponging between somewhere in the 2 to 300 range was that he recognized as we started working together this underlying belief that growth would require more hours and more stress. And for most of us, when we start thinking about growth, we think there are compromises. We think there are sacrifices we're going to have to make. Whether we recognize that explicitly or it's more subconsciously, that's typically the thing that creates that plateau effect, is this concern that when we get what we want, it will be painful. When we get what we want, it'll be harder than what we have right now. Basically, when we get what we want, that bigger thing, that it won't be worth it. And so that's the thought process that he was operating under. And basically, we could call it this idea that, or his mode, let's call it, his mode was that he believed truly that he had to do more work in order to create more revenue. And that simply wasn't the case. And I'll tell you more about why not here in a moment. So that was the starting point. He doubled his revenue, as I mentioned, over the course of the year. How did he do that? I boil it down to these 5 shifts, and I'm going to tell you all 5 of them, and then we're going to dive into them. And then I'll remind you what they are at the end. So you can really think about, how do these 5 shifts impact you and your own business? How do they apply to you and your own business? We'll also put these in the show notes. So if you, in your podcast player, click the link that says full show notes, then you'll be able to see this as well. Okay, so with that, here are the 5 pieces, the 5 shifts. Number 1, commitment to build a different business. Again, I'll tell you what these are individually here in a moment. Commitment to build a different business, number 1. Number 2, valuing his capacity and setting a minimum value. Number 3, changing his business model to higher leverage. Number 4, normalizing higher revenue through quarterly targets. And number 5, refining how he created and creates demand. Those are the 5 shifts. So let's dive into each one of them individually so you can understand what they are. And again, how do they apply to you and your own business? So the first shift is commitment. This might sound flippant, but if you're not truly committed to the goal, then everything else falls apart. Let me give you an example. So this consultant for 2 or 3 years was trying to push past this plateau and move beyond 300, move up to 500. But he wasn't able to. He kept ping ponging back and forth. And the reason why is that he actually, first and foremost, was not committed to the goal. Because every time he started getting some challenge that occurred or some setback that occurred, he would negotiate with himself to make himself feel better and ratchet down the goal. So instead of sticking with 500, he would say, "Oh, we're already finished with Q1, for example. I'm not on track to hit 500, so I'm going to reduce my goal." You might relate to that. That's not commitment to the goal. At the first sign of a concern, you don't start changing the goal. That's not commitment. Commitment is, I am going to make this happen no matter what. No matter if it takes me 11 months or 14 months or 24 months, I am going to generate this 500K in exactly the way that I know that creates the 50K months. And then let's say it did take him 24 months. then he's giving it his all over those 24 months until he gets to the 50K per month consistently, or the 125K per quarter consistently, until he's on a run rate for 500K. Commitment doesn't mean that he just gives up at the first sign that there's trouble ahead, right? And so that's the first shift. And for many of us, that's the step we're missing. We might put it down on a piece of paper. We might write it down and say we're going to go for that goal, but we're in our heart, we're not truly committed. In our brain, we're not truly committed. And that's what those tests give us, right? When you're tested and you notice you're starting to compromise or negotiate with yourself, you're not truly committed. But that's okay. It doesn't mean that you just have to, well, I'm not committed. I guess I'm failing. No, you regenerate the commitment. This is a skill that I teach my clients. One of the core skills, I call it the commitment scale, which is an adaptation of a tool I learned from one of my coaches. But the ability to generate that commitment when it wavers is the key here. It's not that just somehow that you were born with full on commitment or somehow it arrived one day at your house, the full on commitment. It's the generation, your ability to generate the commitment, especially when things get hard and that like new shiny goal energy wears off, right? So that's the first shift he made, is to make a true commitment. The other thing I want to say here is, for a lot of us, good is the enemy of great, right? It can feel good to say I have a 500K goal or a double my revenue goal, whatever that is for you. But at the end of the day, when things are going well for you, like this consultant, he was making between 200 and 300, and that satisfied a lot of his family needs and things like that. So it felt risky that he would almost lose that versus gaining the 500. And that's where, when we start generating around the income and compensation that we had in corporate, it's hard to break through that because of the fear that we might lose it when we're going for something bigger, which is a mental thing, right? That's not an actual thing. And so recognizing that is so important. So that was the first shift, is commitment first, and regenerating commitment when it wavered, because it for sure for him wavered, and for you, it will waver too. Otherwise, you should set a bigger goal. If you're fully committed to something and never second guess it, then the goal's too small. Okay, shift number 2, valuing his capacity. What this means is he literally assigned a value to his capacity. Now, he didn't charge by the hour, but this is a unit measurement that he created to help him create guidelines for himself about what kind of business he was willing to accept and what kind of business he was wanted to refer out. So let me tell you what this means specifically. He calculated the value of his available time using a realistic utilization calculation. That was a lot of words. I'll give you an example. So his goal was 500K without working more than he had when he was generating 258. So that was his goal. I call that a compound goal. 500K without working more. For him, it was around 30 hours. So he ran this calculation for himself. He ran the numbers to value his capacity. Simple calculation, right? 500K goal. He wanted to work 10 months of the year, 30 hours a week, and assume that he was around 70% utilized, which means that around 30% of the time, even though he had capacity, he may not sell that capacity, right? We can't assume that we're always going to be selling work. And so he used a 70% utilization number. For you, if you get to pick that number, right? It's based on your track record of selling work and the length of your sales cycle and your ability to generate all demand. All of those numbers go into your best guess about your utilization. So with that, he calculated that his time needed to be worth around $600 an hour. And that single calculation forced better decision making for him. It helped inform pricing for him. Again, he did not charge by the hour. I am not suggesting you charge by the hour unless it's a unique circumstance, but this gives a good measurement to understand and create a floor for designing proposals, for example. And he decided and committed to setting that as a non negotiable minimum value as he was pricing, as he was determining what work to agree to take on and what work to refer out, like I said. So that's shift number two, setting a value to your capacity. The mindset shift that goes along with this business change is the thought process that and the commitment to no longer operating below a certain number, that thinking about from the perspective of underpriced work no longer fits the business model that you're running, like making declarative statements with yourself and replacing fear with confidence that you could figure it out. That's what he did, right? Of course, he's a human. You experience this too. When you roll off a project and you have nothing in your pipeline, of course you're afraid. All of us are afraid. We think we were a one hit wonder, or we think that it was a fluke, the last role we got. All of those things are common thought processes. But when you have a process to replace that fear with confidence that you can figure it out, confidence that you can control demand, then you set yourself up to make better decisions that match up to the value of your capacity rather than letting the fear drive your business. Okay, shift number three was changing his business model. Now, of course, we're not talking about the macro business model here. He's an independent consultant with some subcontractors that he occasionally refers work to. We're not talking about changing that business model. What we're talking about is changing the details within that business model. And specifically for him, he at his 258K work, I shared with you that he did a lot of fractional COO type engagements, also some projects here and there. He changed that. He moved away from that execution heavy work and started introducing and selling advisory work, retainer type work, and strategy focused engagements that weren't so time consuming, that didn't require so much of his focused time, and freed up his brain to even be able to think for his clients in a different way than he was able to before when it was so execution heavy, meeting to meeting to meeting, right? When you're a fractional COO, it looks a lot like your employee life. So this change to his business model, shift number three, was driven by a mindset shift, driven by a change in the way he thought of himself, purposefully thinking of himself as an advisor, as an expert, not as an executor, not as someone who did the work, and starting to build up and really believe that his value is from his judgment and from his expertise and the direction he gives to his clients versus the time that he's spending on the work. He built a belief system that his ideal clients are happy to pay for his expertise and that there are plenty of those ideal clients. And you may relate to this. He let go of equating value with doing. I'm going to say that again because so many of us get stuck in this trap. He let go of equating value with doing. That freed him up to see that what he was offering was immensely attractive to the ideal clients that he wanted to work with. That he didn't have to produce deliverables anymore to demonstrate value. All right, shift number four was for him normalizing higher revenue numbers. So we all create set points in our mind. We get used to them. Those set points come from corporate most of the time, whatever our corporate compensation was. We're used to getting a certain amount of a raise every year, maybe a bit of a leap when we change companies or change jobs. That's what we're used to. We create these plateaus in our mind for ourselves. The idea of doubling your income in a given year is very rare, right? If you're in corporate, you don't typically think I'm going to double my income this year unless you're, anticipating an exit event or a big promotion, of course. But this is different as a business owner. You can normalize doubling of revenue. You can normalize big leaps in your revenue and ultimately your income and your profit. The change for this consultant when he jumped from 258 to 214 was that he started thinking differently about the way that he was generating that revenue. Before he was kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to eke out, 25K this month versus shifting his mind to 50K is the new norm and trying to get used to that. What ended up happening though is that as he started trying to get used to 50K is my new norm, let me think in that way. Let me think as a business owner who generates 50K and really getting that to his new set point mentally and with his business model, he realized that it created a lot of pressure. And so what we ended up doing is shifting the way he looked at it to anchor around 125K per quarter. And when he started thinking about it that way, it felt much more repeatable for him. And that's what he focused in on, that 125K is the new norm, 125K per quarter. That's the new norm. His mindset shift that drove that is starting to purposefully think that 125K quarters are possible, that 50K is normal and repeatable, and to be thinking in quarters versus months, to stop thinking about a paycheck every few weeks like we're used to, but to truly embrace this idea for himself and to look at the numbers in terms of his revenue plan and his lead generation plan that support this idea of 125K per quarter. And that helped to open up new ways of problem solving for him, where he wasn't battling like so many of us do. Oh, is it realistic to generate 50K months or 125K quarters? Instead, he focused on how do I create this 125K? What is the mix of offerings? How do I reduce my sales cycle? How do I improve the quality and urgency of my leads? Those are the types of questions that are so valuable once you get to this place of normalizing the higher revenue number. Okay, let's move on to shift number 5, which is refining his demand creation. So many of us think, and he did too. Well, he originally started thinking in order to support this doubling of revenue or moving from 250 to 500, I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to do more things to generate leads. And instead, we took a step back. We looked at his data. It was spotty, but we started to see some themes around anecdotally and with some of the data that he had that his leads came from speaking and from selectively attending. So I'll say selectively and intentionally attending events and being part of associations. Those were the things that worked for him before to get to 258. So instead of throwing those out and starting some outbound plan, for example, or instead of keeping those and adding a bunch of more tactics onto the plan, he just doubled down on those. He went from speaking once a quarter to once a month. He went from going to one or two events a year to keeping those and also finding some regional associations that he could be part of where he could do some speaking at and networking. He met some channel partners that introduced him to clients. So it shortened his sales cycle because there was a transfer of trust. This all came from figuring out what works best to create demand for him by looking at his data and then doubling down on that rather than trying to chase or pursue some tactic that he read about that he thought he might need to pile on. And the mindset shift that fueled this particular change was the mindset that I don't wait for or depend on demand, I drive it. That's what he said to me. I don't wait for or depend on demand anymore. I've figured out how to drive it. He also created confidence and consistency that replaced passivity, waiting for leads to come to him or hoping that leads came to him, and also panic, right? Panic when they don't. He was able to create that confidence, that certainty, that consistency in his mind. And that helped him to get to the point where he had more control over his demand creation and ultimately hit that goal of doubling his business, or 99.4%, I think is the exact number. So that gives you the 5 tangible shifts that you can be making that he made to take his business from 258 to 514. Or for you, maybe you're at 200 and you want to go to 400. Or maybe you're already at 400 and you want to go to 8. think about these 5 principles for yourself and how they apply to your business and how you can implement them to get yourself to the place where this year you've doubled your revenue. Let me restate these 5 shifts in a slightly different way, and then we'll talk about the lessons learned to apply to your business. And then I'll share with you the next step to put this episode into action. Okay, so pulling this together, the 5 shifts that you want to be thinking about are: number 1, commitment. Commitment keeps you going no matter what. Number 2, capacity math helps you set shifting your business model to create real leverage for yourself. Number 4, quarterly thinking to have a centering principle around a new set point for yourself. And number 5, focusing your demand creation to generate higher quality leads that have a shorter sales cycle and the aligned pricing back to your capacity math. Those are the 5 shifts that will help fuel you getting from where you're at right now to double that this year. All right, let's talk about the result here. The $514,125 that he generated, again, he nearly doubled his revenue. It was 99.4%. So I'll give him the extra credit up to 100. So close. Maybe one more invoice and would have hit it. He created predictable, controllable quarters. You can too. He now has certainty that replaces volatility. You can do this too. A new revenue set point and the identity of a $500,000 business owner. You can make these changes in your business and for yourself to make them easy going forward, to make them the new norm, to make them your new set point, whatever your number is. And so as we wrap up, the real lesson here is that growth follows commitment. Growth happens when thinking changes first. Your capacity, your business model, and your demand all need to align. And this path is repeatable for you as a consultant when you're willing to decide and then design a model and a process and your capacity math to match it and then execute it until you make it happen. That's the commitment. So wrapping up today's episode, to put it into action, go download that workbook for yourself. You can find it at melissalieberman.com/double. It's the Double Your Consulting Business Workbook. It has some different questions and vantage points and perspectives in there that will help you build a plan for yourself based on today's framework, an expanded version of today's framework, I should say, that will help you build out a plan and set yourself up to double your revenue, no matter where you're at here as we start the year off. All right. Thank you for tuning in. I'm so happy you're here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.